I don't know how it happens, but I think I've been lucky a few times in my life. Spending an afternoon with Carla Koplin Cohn and some of her family would undoubtedly be one of those times. Although I had not had the pleasure of meeting any of the Kulik family until recently, we all realized we had a real connection. That story, however, is not the purpose of this podcast. Discovering it did make me realize that Carla has quite a story of her own. As a favor to one of the grandsons of her grandparents' close friends, that would be me, she agreed to join me today. How did one become the personal secretary of one of the greatest baseball players of all time while he was chasing the most coveted record in baseball? Well, I'll let her tell you that story. And with that story comes a unique behind-the-scenes look from the perspective of someone who saw him daily, interacted with him for years, and was his personal friend until the day he died. My guest is Carla Cohn, and she is talking about, arguably, the greatest of them all, Hank Aaron.
Viewing life from a hearse, it could be worse. Laugh, think, and cry with the country undertaker.
This is Bruce Goddard, and you're listening to the View from a Hearse podcast. I have a special guest today, as you have heard. Carla Cohn is with me from Boca Raton, Florida. Carla, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate you getting on here and talking to me today.
Oh, you're quite welcome. Quite welcome.
Carla and I have discovered recently, and I did talk to Carla a couple of years ago. I'll tell you about that in a little bit, but we discovered recently that our grandparents were very close friends, and which means our parents, her mother and my daddy, were like 2 years apart, all in this little town of Reynolds, Georgia. And so we've got this connection, and I was able to meet with their family a few weeks ago and just kind of realize the connection we all have. Carla, it's been fun connecting with all that. Our grandparents and parents have to be smiling somewhere, right?
They've got to be, and it's such a small world that we found each other.
Absolutely. So the thing about Carla is that I think will get your attention. Carla, for many years, was Hank Aaron's personal secretary. And that is the Hank Aaron, the home run king, the hammering Hank, Henry Aaron, the one we all know, my idol growing up as a huge baseball fan. So we've got his personal secretary on the phone. So right off the bat, Carla, how in the world did you get the job of being Hank Aaron's personal secretary? I got to know that.
Actually, I was working in Atlanta for a gentleman and his father. They owned an insurance co-op, and it was a two-man operation. And I was young. I was, 22 years old, maybe. And I wasn't meeting people. I was just in an office with the son and the father. And I said, I have got to start looking for another position. And I picked up the phone and called the Atlanta Braves just on the spur of the moment.
Really? That's incredible.
And I was put on with Dick Cecil, who was then the vice president of the Atlanta Braves. And he told me, yes, they do have an opening. Could you possibly come in tomorrow for the interview? And even though I knew that tomorrow was Yom Kippur, which is the holiest day in the Jewish religion.
Right.
And I said, God will forgive me. I have got to go on this interview.
Absolutely. Wow.
And I did. and they hired me on the spot, but it was not to be the personal secretary for Hank Aaron, because no one in baseball, no player, had a personal secretary,
I'm sure.
in 1969.
Right.
So I went to work for the Braves organization. They were starting an all sports camp for kids in North Georgia. And they had hired a director, and they wanted to know if I would work for him. And of course, I said yes. Well, my office was in the tunnel of the Atlanta Stadium.
The old Atlanta Stadium, yeah.
Right, the old Fulton County Stadium.
Right.
And no windows, but I had a big office. And my office happened to be right in front of the Braves clubhouse. And during the off season that year, the players would have to come through my office in order to get into the clubhouse to work out. So there I was meeting all these athletes, and I was a baseball fan. I had two brothers.
So what's funny right now to me is you were in an office with two men or two people, and you said, I got to get out to meet people. And now you're in the office and you're meeting all these famous athletes.
I mean, I am meeting not only the baseball players, but the camp that I was helping to start was an all sports camp. And it was owned not only by the Braves, but Tommy Novus, who was
Falcons.
Jeff Mullins from the
basketball,
and we had a soccer player. I can't remember who the soccer player was, but they were all owners. So I would meet them because they would come into the office. We would have to have them autograph letters to all the kids. And during this time, Henry kept coming in constantly to work out. And by this time, he had already hit, I think, 600 home runs.
Right.
And he would ask me, could you help me do this? Send out a letter, make an appointment for his kids, because he was in the process of getting a divorce when I started working there. So I did, and he kept asking me more and more, can you do this? Can you do that? And we became really good friends. He was the kindest, most generous human being. He didn't have a mean bone in his body. And every time I would do something, it was always thank you.
Right.
Oh, could you please do this? And I finally said one day, Henry, I love helping you, but I really can't do my job with the camp and assist you as much as you need now. And he said, well, I'll take care of that. And he was ready to sign a new contract for the Braves. So I was written into his contract, and I moved from the tunnel of the Atlanta Stadium up to the executive offices.
It's so funny.
So that's how it came about.
He broke the record in 74.
He broke it in 74. I went with him to Milwaukee.
Right.
And I worked in the PR department of the Milwaukee Brewers. And, and also worked for him as well. And then when he was ready to retire, I said, I'm going to leave because I have to go to New York City for at least 1 year. I went to a secretarial school there after attending the University of Georgia for 2 years. And I transferred. And I said, I really never got to enjoy the city because I was working. And in those days, secretarial school in New York City was tense. You had to wear a hat, gloves, a dress, and high heels to school every day.
Wow.
And I said, I've got to do this, and then I will come back to Atlanta, because I knew that's where he was going to return, because his home and kids were there. And so I moved to New York City, and of all the apartments I could choose, my future husband lived right across the hall from me.
Oh,
and
goodness.
We met, and that I never went back to Atlanta.
Unbelievable.
But Henry and I stayed very close, until he died. And he's like part of my family.
Yeah, I know. I've seen pictures of he was at your family weddings and all that kind of stuff. Created a lifelong relationship for sure, right?
Yes. And I was just in Atlanta. The U.S. Postal Service dedicated a stamp in his honor. And so I went to Truist Park with his wife and kids for the stamp to be unveiled.
You also go back to these reunions or these Hank Aaron days and all this stuff there, right? Do you still do that?
Yes. Whenever he's honored for his birthday, or if he's trying to raise money is Chasing the Dream Foundation. They were always trying to raise money, so Billy, his wife, decided every big birthday or every anniversary of his breaking Babe Ruth's record, they would have a very special event where companies or individuals would, buy tables. And they had the cream of the crop. I met Bill Clinton several times, and different entertainers would come. So it was an exciting period, in my life.
Oh, my goodness. And the fact that you just called almost on a whim to the Atlanta Braves to ask for a job, and you ended up being close personal friends and a secretary of arguably the greatest baseball player that ever lived. That's pretty cool.
Bruce, if I had known then what I know now, I could be a multi-millionaire. And Henry and I would always laugh about it because I was young. I loved baseball, but I really didn't know the history of it. And I must have received thousands of baseball cards while I was working for him. The kids would send in to be autographed.
Right.
But they wouldn't send just one card. They could send 100 cards.
So how would he handle that? Would he sign all those cards?
No, there was no way.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So he would sign one, and I would return that one, and the others I threw in the trash. But all his rookie cards that are worth hundreds of thousands of dollars now, in the trash.
Yeah.
But we got a really kick out of it, when we would talk about it before he passed away.
My older brother, Mac, who you met, is his friend Hollis collected baseball cards, and he's a lot older than me, and he had all these 50s, late 40s, 50s baseball cards. We had a box of them, and I got mad with my other brother one time and gave them away to somebody when I was a kid, and I can't believe it. I guess no telling how much money I gave away when I did that.
Oh, my younger brother collected baseball cards, and he was just a year younger than I am. And there was a gentleman in Atlanta who was a huge Brave booster.
Right.
They had the booster fan club, and he gave every one of those to this gentleman, and now I have no idea how much these were worth.
There's no telling. So let me ask you this. You were talking about how nice he was and kind he was. He was obviously a superstar. How did he handle that success? I mean, what did his demeanor change when he hit 2 home runs in a game and had 6 RBIs, or how was his personality with all that?
It was so even. He really didn't consider himself a superstar. He had a job to do, and he did it. And he was just so grateful that he had this talent. And he never had a big head. He never boasted about how many home runs, how many bases he stole, how many RBIs. He just had a job to do, and he did it.
I remember several things watching him play, and I watched him play in person, and there's no telling how many times on television, but I watched him play in person a lot. He had the quickest hands. He hit the ball with his wrist. And
yes.
he would hit it just a click of his wrist. It was unusual. And then he had a cannon out in right field. He could throw the ball, and like you said, he could steal bases. A lot of younger people just think he's the home run king. This guy was a 5'2" player. He could do it all, right? I mean, he was amazing.
Yes, and later in life, he had great difficulty with his knees and hips, and he said it was really because of trying to steal base.
Oh, I'm sure. But he could run, and he was a smart base runner, and he was a natural born talent, unbelievable talent, that is for sure. And again, I'll say it again, my favorite baseball player ever growing up was Hank Aaron. There's no question. So who was he closest to, like ball players and stuff? Were there any that jump out at you that he was just friends with?
Yes. Oh, yes. Dusty Baker.
Yep, and he's still around. Yep.
Yes, Dusty won the World Series with Houston. Was it 2 or 3 years ago?
He's the manager. Yeah, that's right.
And Ralph Garr.
Yep.
They were both kids
right.
when they came to the Braves, and Henry was their mentor, and he would watch over them and make sure they were polite, they weren't drinking because they were young and it wasn't legal. And to this day, well, until the day he died, they remained so close. And both of those men would come to every event. And Dusty even came, he couldn't make it for the stamp dedication, but the Braves had an event at the History Center.
Right.
Honoring 50 years of breaking Babe Ruth,
which was this year. Yeah, that was this year. Yeah.
Yes, it was. It was April 8th.
Yep.
And Dusty and Ralph both came, along with some of the Braves from that year: Tom House, Ron Reed, Marty Perez, and I could go on and on. But they all came to the History Center.
What an amazing story. Folks, I'm talking to Carla Cohn. She's talking to me from Boca Raton, Florida. Hank Aaron's personal secretary. This is an incredible story. Carla, how was his relationship with other great players like Willie Mays and all those people?
Yes, he had a great relationship with Ernie Banks. I think that was probably his closest friend.
For the Chicago Cubs, yeah.
And Willie Stargell from Pittsburgh, the Pirates.
Right.
Gosh, there's so many. He was friendly later with Dave Winfield and Willie McCovey. I could go on and on. Any of those players. Mickey Mantle, they played in the All-Star game together, but I finally met him. I believe it was in Milwaukee when the Brewers hosted the All-Star game, and that might have been 75. He wasn't that close with Willie Mays. I think there was a lot of jealousy.
Yeah. That's why I wondered. That's why I asked the question. I mean, they were both considered great baseball players, and they both were, but you wondered what the competition was or whatever between the two. I mean, I've seen them interviewed together, and they certainly laugh and play off each other and all that, but I wondered about that.
Willie Mays got all the publicity. He was in a better market.
Yes, sure. He started in New York and then in San Francisco. Yeah, he was in big markets for sure.
Henry was Milwaukee and Atlanta.
Yep.
So big difference.
Yeah, no question.
But they had great respect for each other.
You had to. And anybody that knows anything about baseball has respect for Hank Aaron. That is absolutely true.
Yes.
But the truth is, during that chase, when he started chasing Babe Ruth's record, you got 95% of the people out here love him and adore him, and you got a few people that are idiots that were sending him hate mail and all that. Did you have to open this mail and read the mail, or what was your role with all that?
I would open as much as I could, but you have to remember when he got close to Babe Ruth's record, he was receiving thousands of letters. I believe the U.S. Postal Service gave him a plaque. For 1974, he received more mail than anyone in the United States, and they estimated it to be 900,000 pieces of mail.
Whatever happened to all that mail? Is it somewhere in an archive somewhere? Or?
A lot of it is in the family's possession.
So there was a percentage of it that was hate mail. I'm sure most of that was praising him, right? Am I right about that?
Yeah, I would say there's been a lot of discussions on this, and I would say over 90% of these letters were so favorable, wishing him well and so proud of him. But then you got that other percentage of people who were racist.
Right.
And they did not want to see a black man breaking a white man's record.
Isn't that amazing?
And he had death threats. So I would turn all those letters over to the FBI.
Wow.
And they would try to find the person. I mean, I said I could never rob a bank because I had to be fingerprinted.
Oh, I'm sure.
So my fingerprints would come up on all these letters because I handled them. All those letters, thank goodness, I preserved.
So you went through enough of the letters to know if it was hate mail or positive. Is that?
Yes, I was kind of able to tell just by the way it was addressed, and but we had a lot of other mail coming in, from different companies wanting him to make public appearances or, do endorsements for them. So it was a lot to open. So I really had to separate it. And then we hired different people to come in to assist me.
Did he talk about that? Is that something he just kept to himself that knew was happening? Behind the scenes, did he talk about the racist people that were sending the letters?
Yes, he was very frightened, and he was frightened really for his kids because there were death threats put out. I know for his daughter, it was at Fisk University, and they had to pull her from class and make sure she was protected.
Wow.
So it was hard. And he did have a detective, Calvin Wardlaw, was hired by the Braves to be with Henry at all times.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that. Surely he had personal security, yeah.
Yes. Calvin would go to the games to protect him when he would leave the stadium, even when he would go out for dinner. A lot of times Calvin would go, but Henry always had a superstition. Whenever he went to a restaurant, he would always make sure he was facing the front door. to see who was coming in.
Right.
That's how frightened he was.
But you know, the reality is he lived in a time and started his baseball career in the old Negro leagues and all that, where he wasn't even,
Yes.
he couldn't even go in a restaurant. He couldn't even use a public restroom. So he had a reason to be looking towards the door or the window, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when the Braves were coming to Atlanta, that was one of the concerns that the players and the front office had. How would they be accepted, and where could they eat and sleep?
Yeah. Isn't that crazy?
It's another coincidence that my great uncle and his brother, the Goldsteins from Atlanta, Georgia, owned the Americana Hotel.
Right.
And they allowed the team players to stay there. They removed all of the water fountains that said colored and white. And they said all people are created equal. And
wow. And that was your uncle. Is that right?
That was my grandmother on my father's side.
Right.
Her younger sister's husband.
Wow. Unbelievable.
So.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
I know his story. I hadn't read this book that you gave me a copy of, and thank you for that. My goodness. But I've read enough about Henry Aaron and knowing his story. He started in Mobile and all the struggles that he had to go through to play baseball and the way the blacks were treated and all that kind of stuff. So I was in college in 1974. I was at the University of Georgia. And when he started getting close to that record, I remember they had a game away, and it seems like he didn't play because they wanted him to break the record in Atlanta. He was one home run short. Isn't that right? Did I remember that right?
Yes, they were in Cincinnati, and in the first game, he tied Babe Ruth's record. I think he hit a home run off of Jack Billingham. And of course, the Braves did not want him to break the record in Cincinnati because they wanted him to do it at home, his family, his fans, and there was a lot of controversy over that.
Yeah, I remember that. And so the other thing I can tell you is I was oblivious to all the hate mail and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I may have known something, but I was such a Hank Aaron, a baseball fan. I was oblivious to that. But that morning in April, was it April 7th? Is that what?
April 8th.
April 8th, 1974.
Correct.
I think it was 6 of us got in this our fraternity brother's yellow Chevrolet, and we headed to Atlanta. And I remember it was cold and rainy, and we stood in line out there. And we got tickets, and then we went to Underground, and as college kids do, there was a lot of partying going on. And so we get back to the stadium, and we had to talk this guy into driving for us over there. And I'll never forget when I was in left field when Hank hit that home run and broke the record. I'm standing up in the seat, and the guy that drove for us was sitting beside me, and he turned around and said, "What happened?" I said, "Oh, my goodness." He was at the game. He didn't even know who Hank Aaron was. But anyway. The thing that also, and I think I mentioned this to you, and I've actually had him on as a guest on here, there were 2 guys that ran around the bases with Hank that night.
Yes,
and
they were lucky they weren't killed.
I know. I've been to Cooperstown a few times. I've seen the video of them when he hits the home run. Every time you see it, they're running around the bases. So Cliff Courtney, Cliff was fraternity brother. The other, Brett Gaston, was a social affiliate at our fraternity, so I knew them both. Although that night I knew somebody ran around the bases, I didn't realize it was them. It was too much going on. But, of course, he was oblivious to that too, and I said the same thing. It's a wonder you didn't get shot. I mean, today you would have gotten shot by running around the bases.
Exactly.
We ended up at the game above first base, about midway up in the stands. So it wasn't exactly, close. And of course, there was a lot of excitement about, here he is, and that sort of stuff. I think it was the 4th inning. We started walking down towards the field, kind of slowly down the steps. And, well, what are we going to do? I don't know. Aaron came up, and so we kind of like down in front. We didn't want to, so we kind of crouched down, and he hit the ball, and we just ran, I can understand how people would say, "Gosh, what a terrible thing to do." I completely get that, but there was no malice intended. It was strictly excitement and adrenaline at that point. Well, when you're 17 years old, your forethought, is not superior, and we just didn't think it through. And we actually, when people say we ran around the bases, here's what we did: we jumped over, and there was a big tarp, because I think they had unrolled a tarp. And being young, we could jump over that, and there were police stationed around, but they were not I'm not saying I was a 4.2 40 runner, but I was a lot faster than these guys. And we met up with Hank just before second base, and then after he rounded second base, then we split off because we had no intention of. We didn't really think where we were going, so we made it over to on the left side of the field, and Britt got up in the stands somehow and ran, and then made a left turn and ran right into a cop. And I had my hands on the rail, and people were moving out so they could help me get up, and I got caught by my belt on the back of my pants and pulled down by security. Well, we could have been shot that night, as it turns out, but I think we were aware vaguely of negativity, and we were Hank Aaron fans, Braves fans and all of that. So it really, I hate to use the expression colorblind, but that's kind of what it was. It wasn't a black white thing. It was an incredible performance and a 1 in a zillion athlete, So they transported us, and it was not by limousine, to the downtown lockup in Atlanta, which there were all kinds of unusual folks there. Britt's dad actually bailed us out. I don't remember the time, but it was early 30. It must have been 3 or 4 in the morning, maybe. His sense of humor was left at wherever he was staying, and rightfully so. We realized the morning after, when we saw the newspapers, we were really feeling kind of bad and embarrassed by it, because we realized that we were interlopers. We inserted ourselves into his moment, and we had no right to do that. We just weren't thinking with matured brains, and it just blew up bigger than we ever considered. But the times we spent with Hank, he's always just down to earth, smiling, gracious, kind. In fact, in 2010, we got together. And this is a report on ESPN, and I'll read it to you. A quote. It's Aaron talking about us. "It's wonderful to see them. I often get asked whatever happened to those two guys. It's nice to see them once again and know that they're doing fine, doing well. The older you get, the more you think about it. I'm just glad things worked out the way they did. It could have been a lot worse. They were having fun with it as kids. They didn't get beat up and all of that. I think they spent 2 or 3 hours in jail. Other than that, it was a happy moment." And this is a quote from Hank Aaron.
That's just the type of guy Henry was.
That says so much about him. It really does. Cliff is a retired eye doctor, and, he grew up, and he talked to me about it. He doesn't like to anymore, because he just realizes that was something he did when he was young, and it was crazy. But the truth is, the story to me is how gracious that Henry Aaron has been to them over the years by inviting them to do whatever, and being involved and all that. What a story. What a story. I was glad I was there. I can tell you that. For years, I saved my little stub, and somewhere along the line, I lost it. I don't know what happened to it. Yeah.
Well, it was a special night. It really was.
I know he had to be relieved. He was just wanting to get it over with at that point, right? He just wanted to get it behind him.
Yes, he said, "I've got to get this done." I think the pressure was really starting to get to him and the family. And it happened that night against Al Downing.
Yep.
And they left him in the game,
the
Dodgers.
Yep.
And they became good friends, and Al Downing came to a lot of Henry's events.
Al Downing, he was with the Yankees before he was with the Dodgers. You mentioned Tom House. I think Tom House is the one that caught the ball out there after he hit it, right?
Yes. Tom caught the ball and brought it back in and gave it to Henry. And all he got was a Magnavox television. Where today, if you catch a ball that's has some historic value, they're getting millions of dollars. but Tom House went on to become a doctor. I believe he was teaching quarterbacks how to throw the ball properly. You'll have to Google him, but he has become quite famous in his own right.
How about it? So Tom House that caught
Yes.
He was relief pitcher, I think, for the Braves.
Yes, he was.
Yeah. So in Henry Aaron's book, I Had a Hammer. I have not read it. I've began reading it, but I will. But he kind of sets the record straight. To me, it's like I need to say some stuff about the social injustice that he faced in his career, and just talk about that book and what his purpose was. And he had a right to say some things. I just put it like that.
Yes, he did have a right, and he was divorced, and he met his wife, Billy Williams. She was a hostess on the Today in Georgia morning show.
Oh, I didn't
Very
know that.
bright woman, and she was originally married to Sam Williams, and his photograph or portrait is in the state capitol. He was Martin Luther King was a student of Sam Williams.
Oh, wow.
And Billy, of course, was very intelligent, a lady, and she really carried on her late husband's legacy.
Sure.
He was fighting for rights for all people.
Right.
And Henry, of course, because he married Billy, started to really see what was going on and how so many people were being tagged and called out just because of the color of their skin. And he became an activist for civil rights.
Sure.
But he did it in a very quiet, unassuming way. And one of his closest friends to this day, well, before he died, was Andrew Young.
Well, what he lived through and a lot of other ball players lived through, I guess one word to say is evil. It was the times we lived in, but it was an evil time. It was unbelievable time. And his sounded like, and I guess through his wife, Billy, too, is that he knew that he could say some things that would help. He could use his being famous to get people to listen that may not be listening to other people, right?
Yes. And I believe, in my opinion, what Henry accomplished after baseball is probably more significant than breaking Babe Ruth's record. He has put so many kids through college that could never afford it. He has worked for every organization trying to help young people. And, he received the Medal of Freedom. I believe that was from Bill Clinton. He's everywhere. I mean, if you look to see what he's done, and he's traveled the world, and he visited every president. I think the only one he refused to go to the White House for was Richard Nixon.
Well, what a story. So the other thing that I mentioned earlier, just in passing, your family story, and I think I want to tie this in. I happen to know really well because Carla's grandparents were Polish immigrants. They were Jewish, and they came through New York, ended up in this little conservative town called Reynolds, Georgia, where I happened to grow up. And this little conservative town welcomed their family with open arms. These people were movers and shakers. They made an imprint on our little town that will last forever. And you being from a Jewish family and knowing that story and knowing what was going on with Hank Aaron during those turbulent times when he was faced with all the racism. And I know you've seen anti-Semitism in your life plenty of times.
Yes, I have.
So did you guys talk about that? Did he realize your story? Did he know that you experienced some of what he experienced, I guess is what I'm saying?
Yes, I believe that could have been the bond that brought us really together, because he experienced the Ku Klux Klan walking past his home in Toomeyville, out, part of Mobile. And I can remember the Ku Klux Klan burning crosses in our neighborhood. So we saw the injustice and the havoc they were causing, and people were frightened. I know my parents would tell us to get on the floor of the car when we would drive by the Ku Klux Klan. And Henry's parents made he and his kids, his brothers and sisters, get under the bed until they had gone. So, were frightening times, but I got hate mail just like Henry did. And my hate mail was, how could a white Jewish girl work for a black baseball player?
Unbelievable.
So we had a lot that brought us together. Wow. And we respected each other.
I figured that had to be part of the story. That had to be part of the story. Wow. So I want to ask you two more questions.
Sure.
What is your greatest memory? What is the memory that jumps out at you? Of all the memories you have, is there one or two that jumps out that you just makes you smile or makes you think? Or
Well, one of them, of course, has to be when he broke Babe Ruth's record. To be a part of that, and I knew how much it meant to him and to his family. And just being in that box down by the dugout with his family, and then going into the dugout after they pulled him from the game. It was just something I'll never forget, being a part of.
And it's a story that you need to tell, and I am honored that I'm getting you to tell a little bit of it here right now. You start streaming podcasts, they're out there from now on. To have your voice telling this story is a bit of history, and it's a bit of great history with him breaking that record, but it's also a bit of painful history in our nation's past. But what a story. What did he teach you?
I think he really taught me to be kind to everyone. He'd always say, you never know who you're going to meet, when you're going down. You could be on top of the ladder now, but then at some point that you could fall off the ladder. So always be kind to everyone. And he never had a bad word to say.
Unbelievable.
He was so grateful for his life.
Well, what a blessing that you picked up the phone and called the Atlanta Braves that day and got this life and this story. It's unbelievable. One more thing I've got to bring up, because some people listening to this won't have any idea of this, but your daughter, Jen, has been part of the Today Show on NBC. So just tell us something about that. People got to know that she's out there.
Well, my daughter graduated the University of Pennsylvania, and her first job was with American Express. And she had only been at work for a week when 9/11 happened. And my daughter was coming up the escalator of one of the World Trade Centers when the plane struck. Good. And she was able to get out, and they just started running. And of course, after that, the American Express office had to be closed because of the damage. It was right across the street. Wow. And so she decided, she can't not work. And she didn't know when American Express building would be ready. So she did the same thing I did. She picked up the phone and called a marketing company, PR, for beauty products. And they hired her, and one of the clients was booked for the Today Show, but no one at the office wanted to appear. And she said, I'll do it. And she did. And that led her to being on so many different television shows, promoting or introducing new products, beauty products.
Right.
And, she's done it now, gosh, 20 years? She's cut back a lot. She might do it once every 3 weeks or a month because she's got 2 children now, and she doesn't have time, and she feels give the younger people a chance because she got a good break.
Her name is Jen Fallick, and she is, if you've watched the Today Show, I'm sure you've seen her. And but what a story, folks! You never know when you tune into this podcast. I think I've ever had a more unique story than Carla's here. Carla, thank you so much for doing this. This has been wonderful. This has been absolutely wonderful.
You are quite welcome. It was a pleasure.
Viewing life from a hearse, it could be worse. Laugh, think, and cry with the country undertaker.